Today I'm going to show you how to install a front leveling kit on your 2014 to current GMC Sierra, Chevy Silverado, and even some of the SUVs I think are the same suspension. Start by detaching the ABS cable. Pull that off. Slide this red locking tab back. It's easier to go at it in here. Push black tab in, pull that out. Get this out of that bracket. Now remove this brake line support bracket with a 10mm. Just throw this bolt back in where it came from for simplicity's sake. Now disconnect the sway bar end link. It's this little guy right here. Both the nut on the top and the bolt head on the bottom are 15mm. So I just hold the nut with a box end wrench and rotate the bolt below. There we go. Get rid of that. Just pull the long bolt out from below. And this intermediate part will drop out once the control arm comes down. Now take an 18mm wrench and loosen the upper ball joint nut. Leave the nut threaded on a couple of turns so that it doesn't just fly apart when you separate the ball joint. Now, being very careful, just smack this part of the spindle with a hammer. Now remove the tie rod nut, 13/16 socket. Now sometimes the stud will just spin on the tie rod and you won't be able to remove it with just rotating the 13/16 nut. So if that happens, just get a wrench, hold the nut, and take a 10mm socket and then rotate the stud. And these usually come right out without much fuss. And take a pry bar and pry down on the control arm. Remove the ball joint nut. There. Now, just let that spindle fall away. Now remove the two strut mount bolts from beneath. They're 15mm. Be prepared because the control arm is going to go with it as it moves down. Now unclip all the various harnesses that attach to these top strut mount studs. Just get them off of there. Now you can start removing these upper strut mount nuts. They're 18mm. I always remove the back two first. Now finally the front one. And obviously the entire strut assembly is going to come down with this nut. Now you can just remove the strut assembly. Just gonna work it out of there. Now I'm using this MotoFab billet aluminum kit. I'll put a link in the description where you can buy it. This is the 3-inch version. Now these MotoFab kits require you to install these studs yourself. So you just thread them in through the bottom here. And then just tighten them down with an 8mm Allen head. You just gotta crank them down just a little bit. Don't make them crazy tight. After all those studs are in place, just put it on the top hat of the strut. Find the way it goes on. They only go on one way. Just like that. And take these 17mm lock nuts and get them on top of the strut mount studs. Spin those down. I can tighten these down. They don't have to be crazy tight. At least 40 foot-pounds will do. Now you can take a pry bar and insert it into the coil spring somewhere where you can jam it up to keep the strut assembly from rotating while you tighten the top nuts. Now take the strut assembly and go up in the middle of this control arm. Just kind of work it in there. You might have to push down on the control arm to get it clear of the strut. Now line up the upper strut mount studs, get them in there. And you can set it on the control arm for right now. Now start at least one of the top strut nuts. Now this next part is kind of tricky. You want to pop off these little clip nuts from the strut assembly. Now take one of the bottom bolts, thread it in there, get it to go in as far as it'll go. It won't go all the way in, because you can see the angle of the strut mount with the control arm is way off. But just want it to be kind of in place. And you can get it to hold in there if you rotate it a little bit. And do the same thing for the other bolt. Now just take a jack and raise the control arm slowly while you hold these bolts in place. Eventually you'll see them start to come through the top there. You can just rotate them in. Once you got a couple of threads past the strut mount, take the little clip nut, get it in place, and just let the bolt find it. And the same thing for the other one. Now you can either take a socket or something and tap these clip nuts down to where they'll re-clip into the strut mount. And then you can proceed to tighten it the rest of the way. Or you can just carefully tighten it. Just be careful not to break the clip nut. And usually it'll pull itself right into its seat. Now, even though I have a lift, I like to do this next part on the ground for safety reasons. Just get a jack under the control arm and raise it up. Just make sure you don't catch it under the spindle, because you're going to have to be able to move that. Now just raise the control arm. Raise it just enough to where you can get this spindle in place and drop the ball joint stud into position. Just take a pry bar, bear it down on the control arm, get that in there, come around with the nut, thread it on. Just tighten that thing as far as you can get it. Now is also a good time to get the sway bar end link in place. Just remember the positions of all these rubber bushings. It's pretty straightforward. Anywhere there's metal, there needs to be bushings surrounding it. So I'll take this middle piece, put it on the control, between the control arm and the sway bar, come up with the bolt, and take the bushing plus the nut, just thread that in place. Now I can tighten down the sway bar end link, same way you took it off. Now you can tighten the 3 upper strut mount nuts. Don't forget about the brake line bracket. And then just reattach the ABS cable. Now you can drop the tie rod into the spindle. Get this nut on there. sometimes you can put enough pressure on this tie rod to keep the ball stud from rotating while you tighten it. Now I usually just click these down to about 60 foot-pounds. You don't want to go much tighter than that because you don't want to accidentally break this spindle. Soft aluminum, sometimes they'll split from the taper if you over torque them. Now finally you can tighten the upper ball joint nut. If that ball stud starts rotating, you can just take a pry bar, careful with the ABS line, and just bear down on it. Now there's no way to get a torque wrench in here, so just do your best. Now at this point, just go over everything, make sure everything's tight and in place. If everything checks out, just go do the same thing on the other side, and you're done. If this video helped you, please consider supporting the channel by hitting the like button and subscribing. Thanks for watching.